Good morning, everybody. Hey, Lou.
I always love it when the mics work. That's always the best part of the show.
I'm glad they're working too. That's great.
Yeah, when we get the intro going and you speak and everyone actually hears you, that's my favorite part of the show right there. Because I know we're okay after that.
That's awesome. It's
Yeah.
great. Well, hey, welcome to this week's episode of Makeup or Breakup, which essentially what we're talking about in the show is what you do with love that's gone sideways. You know, typically we're giving tips and tricks on how to improve your love relationship, or in some cases, how to assess it and maybe move out of it. And, you know, we talk about that all the time because honestly, Lou, we all get into situations where we want to be in a relationship, but deep down, we know it's not the right relationship.
Yep.
Right.
But I think we should point out at this point, it's because it's just occurred to me, we don't talk about it enough. It doesn't have to be a situation where it's gone completely sideways. If you're in a relationship that you want to maintain, that you want to be good, and there are some things that are bothering you, or things that are some cycles that you'd like to change, that's a good time to talk to you as well. Even good relationships that just fix up some areas of it, right?
Right. Yeah. There's all different ways of looking at relationships, but at the end of the day, nobody's 100% wrong. Nobody's 100% right. Even if it's how you deal with the 100% wrong of the other person, you now own a percentage of something.
Yeah. And there are all kinds of areas that you could struggle in that may benefit from some counseling and some improvement. Like, for example, dealing with stepchildren and things like that's always a challenge in a second marriage or a second relationship. So just getting some tools on how to deal with those conflicts that come up, because in every relationship, there are weak areas, right?
Right. And that, it's funny that you said stepchildren, because one of my favorite things to do is to pre-marital coach couples and their families, if possible, on what a second family looks like. It's not blended, right?
Right.
It takes a good 5 years, according to most research. It's a good 4 to 5 years before a family is really working, moving and grooving smoothly. And that each parent, especially the step parents, if one of the people in the couple is a step parent, that they feel like things are working well. It's not usually automatic.
Right. And of course, it's difficult when there's step parents on both sides, there's children on both sides. And so you have to kind of reach agreements in how you're going to deal with things. It's one thing if only one side is a step parent, then you can kind of, give a little leeway to the biological parent and let them do what they want to do and things like that. But when there's other kids involved, compromises have to be reached.
Right. And that's a hard thing, because the older we get, the less willing we are to compromise.
Yeah.
And I think people tend to have this feeling of, this is all of who I am. You need to either embrace all of it or move on, and this isn't a good fit.
Yeah, and parenting is tough because people dig in on parenting. And if there are certain conflicts and principles of parenting, those can be tough to deal with because people are very adamant about the way they parent their kids, usually.
Right. They really are. And I think part of healthy dating is when you're dating someone that has kids and you're going to be a potential step parent, that you look at that seriously. And I think a lot of people tend to, and I was one of these people, so I will take a hit for it. A lot of us, I'm going to say us because a lot of us say, or we get the advice, which I did, we say to ourselves, or our friends will say, well, you know what? These kids are 14 years old. They're going to be out of the house in 4 years. Well, surprise, surprise. That doesn't always happen.
Right.
And so you're marrying someone hoping that these step things that you didn't really want to begin with, or you did, but now you don't, they don't go away. And even if they go away, they're going to come back. So there's no such thing as go away, never come back, unless the relationship is so bad. Then you have to really question, what's the dynamic? Sometimes what we overlook is maybe the common denominator for kids and families staying away is not that the person you're dating has a lot of great boundaries, but that the person, the man or woman you're dating, has actually pushed people away.
Yeah.
Right. And when the kids don't want to come home that often, you really need to take a look at that. And people are afraid to do that because they're like, oh, that's so negative, or I'm just assuming the best. And I'm just, he looks okay to me type of thing. Well, how he acts with you because he wants an adult relationship.
Right.
If he's not respectful and loving and caring and infused in a positive way with his kids' lives, that's not a guy you want to be with.
Right.
And the same goes with women. I see a lot of women who just leave their family of origin to go off with like what they think is the new, knight in shining armor.
Yep.
And they're like, you know what, this is great. I've got a new guy, and yeah, okay, he lives in Chicago, but the kids are old enough, they can get on a plane and come see me anytime they want. But there's a woman that chose a guy in Chicago over her own blood, her own kids.
Yeah, and she probably thinks it's okay and the kids understand, but it lands for the kids.
No, the kids will definitely be affected by that. You can't undo that.
Yep.
When they do therapy, I always tell my clients, the best part about coming to me for my coaching is it's so productive, it's so positive, and it's filled with so many ideas that you can put into play like that day.
Yeah.
And you can make a change so that your kids don't alienate from you down the road.
Yeah, but you're the Bill Belichick of things here in regards to the subject we're talking about, because you deal with Bill talks about situational football all the time. This is situational relationships, and therapy is about dealing with the patient. It's about dealing with your mental health and how you approach these things. There's rarely useful help in terms of interrelationships with other people. It's all about how your reaction to the conflict and how you adjust to the conflict. It's all about you. Therapy is about you. That's the nature of it. But you're talking about situations where, all right, get everybody together and deal with several personalities and make sure that everybody's on the right page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and in that case, we're actually talking about, whenever possible, getting the other ex-spouse involved.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But it really comes down to, boundaries, and it comes down to what's more important to you, your kids, or them having their relationship with their kids, or something in between. And something in between can happen, but it has to happen between the two adults. And usually two people are not, I'm not trying to be mean, but mature to most people means somebody's over 35, right? In some respects. Obviously, there are very mature 20-year-olds out there, but
sure.
Maturity in relation to what I do, maturity means life experiences, therefore years of life, right?
Yep.
So a 25-year-old is never going to have the amount of experiences and lessons as a 35 or 55-year-old. And the problem is, unless they've really gone through this step parenting kind of stuff and remarriage, they don't know what they're doing. Nobody does. Everybody's winging it.
Yep.
They're winging it, and feelings can get hurt. And the only way to get around that is that early on, which most people don't do. They wait till there's like a big hairy deal, like 10 months into the relationship. Early on, instead of talking about like, you like to go skiing and I like to, go kayaking, you should be talking about kids, the relationship you have with your kids. I would be talking about my son if we were dating.
Well, parenting is learning on the job. The first time you have a child is the first time you have a child. The first time you have a teenager is the first time you have a teenager. You're learning as you go, but the way it works for parents, because they learn together and they work things out as they go. When a couple comes together for a second marriage, and you're talking about step parenting situations, the advantage of learn as you go with parents is you don't have to unlearn anything. But when you're in a step parent situation, it's not that you have to unlearn, but you have certain things, certain principles, certain things you think work, and it may come in conflict with what the other parent does, or so it's really difficult because you've established what you think parenting is, and you've established the way you think it should go and how the interaction should be, and it doesn't always work for the other side, and that can be difficult to deal with.
Well, the other trap that people get into, and I'm going to segue into narcissism again, because this may be our last week on narcissism. I don't know. We'll have to see how it goes. What is common, and again, I take one for the team. I was this person. I was always being told that this was my second husband, Mean Jim. He was always saying that his ex was crazy, or that his family was crazy, or he didn't have didn't have a good relationship with any of them, but it was always their fault. And in my mind, I believed it because
Yeah.
I want to think that the ex is a crazy woman. I don't want to think that she's great.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
You know? And then with his family, the same thing. And he very briefly, which was a red sign, a red flag, very briefly, because I brought it up. He said, it's not important for you to meet my family because they're not a big part of my life. And, I've sort of distanced myself,
Yep.
and I'm wording it more in a more wordy way than he did because he never liked to talk about them.
Right.
And, it was concerning to me and it was kind of annoying because they live on the Cape.
Yeah.
So I don't really see the big deal in going down to the Cape. It's not that far. And even if you don't if you're not crazy about your family, there still has to be an introduction. And he did get along with a sister down there. Okay. So if that's the case, then at least bring me down to meet the sister.
Yeah.
Right. And
you know what the problem is for narcissists is the family is backstage.
Always the family is backstage.
Well, they're trying to put on a show and they're trying to give you an impression of who they are. And if you get a look at the family, you get a look behind the curtain. And that's the last thing a narcissist wants.
Right.
They don't want you to see their family's image of them. They want you to see the image of them that they want you to see. So they want control over it. And once they put you in front of the family, they no longer have control over that image.
Right. And so what happens is you get these flashing yellow flags along the way, and sometimes you get like a flashing red flag. It's not really solid, but it's kind of concerning. And that, to me, Lou, I really should just do like a whole online series. Like I always said, I should do a class, on this, because people, men and women, don't give themselves permission for a lot of different reasons. But they don't give themselves permission to sit back and say, wait a minute, just because they picked me on Match.com and we look like a really good fit and we both like to kayak and we both like to ski. He's got 2 boys. I've got 2 girls. They're all like around the same age. Right. And we both live in Massachusetts. I'll just make up that, So we look good on paper. But it's so important early on to not just have fun, but after the first one, which is sort of a light conversation of coffee or whatever, start to ask questions. And if you ask a general question about the kids, or, hey, tell me something fun that you like to do with your kids, or tell me something great about your kids, or, let's be honest, Lou, I'm working up to it. But at a certain point, you are going to say, hey, so, I think it's important for us to be transparent and just talk a little bit about like what happened in our last marriages.
Yep.
So what went wrong in yours? Now, unfortunately, there are many people out there that like to talk about that on the first date.
Yeah.
If you're working with date coach Judith, you are not talking about your past marriage in your first date.
Well, those are people still working on their past marriage, which you shouldn't be dating while you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be dating while you're doing that. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Dating is for no divorce, no boyfriend or girlfriend in the wings, waiting for the night you're lonely.
Right.
It's important for people to sit back and to say, okay, to a certain degree, of course we're going to have fun. Like you're going to say, hey, how about Friday night? I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. And you'll be like, you know what? Let's get pizza. Let's be casual. I'm like, fine by me. So we're going to talk about, to me, that if that's our first or second date, we're going to have fun and say, so what'd you do today? Or maybe I'm going to say, oh my God, I'm so glad we're just having pizza because today was such a stressful day. And for me, I know it's a terrible thing to say because it's not that healthy, but I love pizza. I'm not going to lie. If I could have that every day, like I would.
Yep.
And pizza for me, like it's comfort food, right?
Yep. And
let's be honest. With all the awesome toppings, like pizza just becomes a whole fun thing.
That's
so
right.
I'm like, if it's first or second date, I'm going to be like looking around and be like, oh my God, this place is great. Do you come here often? Probably you would have said yes. You would have already told me.
Right.
So we're talking about environmental things, and then we're going to talk about the day, right? So I'm just going to say, wow, this is such a great way to end a Friday because Fridays are always really busy. I had to drive to Boston. I'm making that up, and then I had to go to Somerville, and you'd be like, oh man, like that is a lot. I'm getting tired just listening to it. Do you have to do that or could you do Zoom? And then that's how the conversation goes.
Right.
Right? Ask me more about what I just said. And then I'll be like, oh, I wish I could Zoom, but the old people I work with down in Somerville, like they just can't do the technology. And you and I have a good chuckle about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
What happens is, and I've been on those dates where somehow during that first fun pizza date, like negative things about somebody's ex-wife. Well, for me, it's an ex-wife because, I'm dating men.
Right.
They're talking about their ex-wife. And I'm like, there was a flashing yellow flag on that because I'm like, is it like our first or second date? I really don't want to hear about Jane or Sue or Barb. I just don't.
Yeah. You're not healed yet. That person is not healed yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the other way that you would determine it in a more healthy way would be maybe like on the third date. I'm not saying you wait till the 30th date, but you say, hey, so, I'm making this up. So you've been living, here in Cambridge. I love Harvard Square. This is so cool. Have you been living here since your divorce or whatever? Right. And then you say, oh, yeah. So when I was married, I lived in Boston. But then when I got divorced 5 years ago, I decided to move out to Harvard Square. And I'd be like, oh, that's great. How do you like it? Now, we touched upon the divorce, but we didn't say a lot.
Right.
And after you tell me how much you like where you live now, I might say, so looking back, like, how would you summarize what did or didn't work with your past marriage? And that's a nicer, fluffier way of saying, tell me about your ex-wife.
Yep.
So like, let's say I said that, what would you say? Like, say we're on a date and I said, so tell me a little bit about like, what were the things? And remember I said what worked. So that's a positive. What did or didn't work, in your marriage?
Oh, it was a situation where it just grew kind of cold. We kind of separated from each other, and then we had Sarah, and we became great parenting partners. But the relationship had pretty much evaporated at that point. We were great as parents, but we weren't too great together. We were living on different schedules. She was teaching, I was writing, and it went cold. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, like I tell everybody all the time, the best part of our marriage was when she was pregnant with Sarah. It's like, we were, finally together on something and doing something together and kind of reconnect, but it didn't last. It turned into a parenting partnership and no relationship at that point.
Mm-hmm. So was that like over like many, 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 many years type of thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you sort of drifted apart, but could never really fully come back together. But like,
yeah. Well, we didn't have Sarah until 7 years into the marriage, 7 or 8 years into the marriage. And there was a miscarriage in there as well. So we had been together a long time. Yeah. And things had grown cold at that point.
Right. So it's almost like by the time you started having kids, things had sort of waxed and waned a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So like, was it a like a really ugly divorce, or was it the type of thing where you both saw that? Like, how did it kind of end? Like, did you both kind of agree that you would fallen by the waysides?
Yeah. It had become obvious, and she had got a medical diagnosis, and it was a little bit of a strain on her, and she didn't want everything on top of each other. So we just decided to separate and deal with it that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So was there yelling and throwing of pots and pans, or what was the?
No, some tough, emotional conversations, but no, we're not. Neither of us is real conflict based, and no real anger. And as you know, we were separated for a long time before we finally got divorced, and it's very amicable. And
so with the separation, so you guys were separated for like many, many years, and then but you were still doing co-parenting and doing things like amicably.
Yeah. In fact, at the time, it was necessary because the kids were going to school out of district. She went to teach in Andover to get the kids in the Andover system. And we were living in Haverhill at the time. She was teaching at the high school, so she was on a different schedule than the kids. So every day I'd go over and get the kids prepped for school, take them to take them to their school, pick them up after school, come home, spend time until she got back home. So I was in the house every day. I was, with the kids every day. For a lot of that period. So, we decided really early on, because we all had friends and people and family members who'd gone through divorces, and were really kind of scared by the contentiousness of it. And we decided early we weren't going to do that, and the kids were the priority. And so once we focused on the kids, then you start giving leeway in the personal conflicts because,
So that's so great. So your kids, don't have these memories of like ugly fights that you guys were having while you were separated. Like you weren't like throwing darts at each other.
No, we were in the house together, every day at some point, sometimes had some dinners together and stuff like that. Never was a quote unquote visitation schedule. We just kind of worked it out. But,
Wow.
yeah.
That's so unique.
Well, I think it's turning a strength into one of my personal weaknesses, which is I'm very conflict averse. Adverse, and I think she was too. And like I said, we'd seen a lot of examples and had a lot of recent examples of some really bad divorces and fights and stuff like that. Didn't want to put the kids through it. Didn't want to put ourselves through it. Just try to handle it like adults. And once you take that approach in it, and there's a lot of give and take, the conflict lessens.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of an adjustment period, and then after the adjustment period, and dealing with the fact that the marriage failed, just that emotional aspect of it became easy after that.
Yeah. It's so interesting because one of the things that I'm hearing is that, and I don't know if this is true, but I'm pretending I'm on a date, so I do know some of the answers here. But so I would say to that, just because other people watching might think this. So what I'm hearing is, in some ways, something that I believe in is what you guys actually did, which is have a longer separation. It's kind of like, I feel that people should date for quite a while. So like if we were dating, I'd be saying, so just so you know, like I am not looking to get married in 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'd be laughing going, me either. I think dating, and then, at a certain point, obviously, if it continues to go well, then you kind of commit to each other. So you're not wondering if the other person's out dating 6 other people when you're not.
Right.
But the same goes with the divorce. So what's interesting is how you guys separated. Now I know maybe it sounds like do you think part of it was because you guys were both conflict averse? Like the D word was a little frightening at the time, like somehow, but then you kind of fell into it. You kept like a co-parenting routine, which is like amicable, which is so fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, the conflict averse had a couple of ramifications, one of which we didn't fight. We tried to make it work, and we tried to give to each other a little bit. Secondly, putting the kids first, we didn't want the kids out of the house. So division of property, we kind of put off division of property. It wasn't the house. My thing was the house is for you and the kids, and then, we'll try to make it work. And we went through it, that way. And, that was part of the process of putting off the divorce, because by the time we got to actually doing the settlement and the divorce and going through the mechanics of it, not only were we had worked together a long time, we had become used to the situation. It was kind of clinical at that point. It wasn't done in the emotion of the breakup,
Oh, okay. Yep.
So it was a very perfunctory type of thing. There was no emotion involved in doing the divorce at that point. A little negotiation. We, butted heads a little bit here and there, but, for the most part, there wasn't the relitigation of the relationship like in most divorces, because as you know, when you go into a divorce proceeding, oftentimes you're still fighting the relationship. It's like, no, I want the house because, he had a girlfriend or whatever, and instead of thinking about what the practical application should be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
But they were young. I was very afraid. I was conflict averse. I was very afraid of being the every other weekend and Wednesday night parent. Didn't want to do that at all. And fortunately, she had no interest in that either. And by necessity, I had to be with them every day to take them to and from school. So, circumstances worked out well. But I think that weakness of being conflict averse helped us, because we just decided we weren't going to do that path. Like, hopefully, we were just smart enough that, that, as you know, when you get into a divorce situation with, we weren't young, but we were younger than we are now. Certainly, you understand that if you've got a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old kid, you guys are going to be interacting for another 20 years at a minimum, right?
Yep.
So you got to decide what that's going to look like. And we decided we didn't want it to be a war. I remember having the conversation specifically. We didn't have to worry about, this is back in the day, Sarah's 10 or 11. We didn't want to worry about her wedding and whether they were going to be able to sit you and I together, or have us in the house at the same time with grandkids. Didn't want that relationship. I didn't want to fight for the next 20 years, and neither did she.
Right. So that sounds so healthy, because again, if I were on a date, I'd be saying, it's interesting because most of the guys that I'm dating, like, they have these really awful war stories about their ex-wives, and it's so unsettling to hear some of those stories. Like,
Yeah.
they're kind of crazy.
Yeah, and chances are, if you're in your first divorce, chances are there are people around you who have been divorced, and you've seen that firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like some people react different ways. And like I said, my nature being conflict averse, I didn't want that. I specifically didn't want that. So let's try to do this in a way that, works for all of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so over the last several weeks, we've been talking about
Well,
narcissists.
like I said, I don't want to take too much credit for it because a lot of it was me being chicken. I just didn't want the battle. Didn't want the battle. I'd like to say I was a nice guy and it was all being beneficial and everything, but and I had my conflicts like she did, but the priority was the kids, and the priority was, how do you want to live the next 20 years? How do you want to raise these kids? Do you want to raise it in a fight, or do you want to raise it, reasonably and as parenting partners? And we were always very good as parenting partners, so that helped.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. So segueing into the book that we've been talking about, which is Healing from a Narcissistic Relationship,
Yes.
which is a great book, by the way. We want to talk about the fact that getting out of a terribly narcissistic relationship is often the best thing, because these people, they never stop. They never put the sword down. God forbid they ever have to say they're sorry, or that they own something that went wrong, that it was because of them that the boat sank.
And it's inevitable you become the enemy, because you know more and more about them, and you see more and more behind the curtain, and you see the flaws, and that is something that terrifies them. They don't like that. So it's inevitable you become more and more of an enemy.
Right. So we aren't going to get through all this today. Actually, I lied. Now that I'm thinking about it, but I do want to just remind people that when you're working with a marriage or a long-term relationship, or you're just dating somebody that you've pretty much pegged as a narcissist based on the 13, 14 point system that we went through earlier, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the main thing to remember is that a narcissist will always be a narcissist. So if they have more than 55% of the characteristics that we listed, and I can go over those again, maybe at the end of this, maybe next week.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, to me, Lou, when we look back at our own relationships where we're pretty sure we were dating a narcissist, I think one of the hardest things to come to terms with for us was, well, that term didn't even come to my mind, but I think one of the hardest things for me, like, to accept was that, that maybe there was more to this person than I originally was kind of thinking, that there's almost like a form of mental illness. Like, did you ever feel that? Like, this just isn't right to, like, never think you're wrong, or...
Again, I guarantee you, if you've been with a narcissist, you have asked the question at some time, who does this?
Right.
It's less than human. You've had the thought it's less than human.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about a thinking disorder, an emotional disorder. It absolutely is.
Right. And I think I read something once recently where somebody said, how do I know if I'm with a narcissist? And the answer was, when you wake up every morning knowing that you're going to have a bad day at some point because of that person.
Yeah.
That person's probably a narcissist.
Yeah.
And the author of this great book, Healing from a Narcissistic Relationship, says, I actually prefer to use the term emotionally disabled because it's more accurately describing the situation. These emotional disabilities are always there, although the narcissist can sometimes override them.
It's funny because I always use the term empathy challenged. Narcissists have no empathy.
Yeah, they have no empathy.
Yep.
When their false self is in place, they can appear quite normal, relaxed, funny, entertaining, and charming. But don't be fooled into thinking that everything is all right. They will inevitably reverse again. Always keep in mind that the narcissist is emotionally impaired, and be prepared for him or her to malfunction. So what we need to do is, I'm not going to read the descriptions, but the things that you need to be looking at are, you need to overcome your fear of being judgmental. You're not being judgmental. You're looking this straight on. You're looking at the dysfunctionalities, and you need to be able to say something's not right.
Right.
Okay. You need to quit caretaking. We've talked about that. the narcissist always requires a caretaker, someone
Mhm.
who cleans up their mess, someone who says, "Oh, it's okay. I won't go to work today. I'll stay home and make you homemade chicken soup." It's
And you were
over.
and you were selected specifically because you see value in being a caretaker. You see how your worth is about being a caretaker for this person.
Right.
Yep.
The next one is focus on you. Most caretakers keep obsessing about the narcissist because it has become a habit. And you need to step back and say, you know what? I'm not going to take a day off of work for that. You can, crawl to the kitchen and get your chicken soup. I'm not going to change my plans with my mom. I'll just go see my mom and you don't have to come. So stop kowtowing and giving in to every wish and desire and plan, which is operative.
Yeah.
Focus on yourself. The other thing is change your reactions. The way you have been reacting to the narcissist behaviors has to be changed so that you can move forward with your life. You also need to protect yourself from further emotional damage. It's time to stop being controlled by the narcissist's need to make everything about being superior, you being inferior, them being good, you being bad, them being right, you being wrong, or they win in an argument, you lose.
Mm-hmm.
Because those patterns are leading to anger, hurt, fear, and anxiety, and ultimately have been at the core of much of your suffering and your distress. The
Yep.
narcissist is fine, right? Yep. The other thing is, this is a good one. Let go of winning and losing.
Yeah.
You're not in an argument to try to win, and you don't need to worry about losing, because losing just means you didn't give in to their, to what they wanted. That's not losing. That's standing up for your own rights.
Right.
And that's the healthy thing you want to be doing.
That's a boundary. That's not
right.
Losing. That's a boundary.
Right. The problem is part of the narcissist game is that game of control. And
Yep.
so it can be very, very, very hard to get out of it. And that's something that I work on with my clients when they're literally married to or living with a narcissist. Or it could be their mother-in-law is a narcissist. I have to create these boundaries, like you said.
You agreeing to things, you giving in is supply for them. And in fact, the more egregious you giving in other words, the more ridiculous they are and the more you go along with it, the more it feeds them, the more supply you give them. So
Exactly.
they'll keep pushing that boundary. And because to them, that's a sign of their worth, that you'll even do this stupid thing for me. That's how much you think of me.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Yep.
Exactly. The other thing is only you have the right to judge yourself. A narcissist will continually judge you and make you, they'll judge like whether or not your feelings are appropriate, whether or not your reactions are right, like you overreacted or you're too touchy-feely or whatever it is.
Yep.
They don't get a right to judge you. It is what it is, right?
Yep.
If you're angry, you're angry. If you're upset, you're upset. But they don't get to keep calling it. And unfortunately, we get into the habit of listening to these narcissists and we start to feel bad about ourselves since they like to tell us it's always our fault.
Right. And if you want to know how unacceptable judgment is, try judging them.
Right.
That's the kind of reaction you get.
Oh, yeah. We all know where that goes.
Yep. Yep.
To hell in a handbasket.
Yep.
The other thing is stop hiding. And this is what I work on with my clients as well. Tell others what you're going through. Because the narcissist is painting this picture to everybody that you're the crazy one.
Yep.
That they're doing everything right because they've been telling everybody in their whole world that they're always right. You need to start telling people the truth, the things that they've been doing, saying, things that they haven't done, like not showing up for your kid's graduation just to be a jerk. You need to tell people about these things. And you will in return be free of keeping these secrets, of letting them know that you went along with things you shouldn't have gone along with, or, you laid down way too many times, but, the old Judith is gone and a new Judith is rising, and you will get support from people when you open up and tell them about these things.
Yep.
Because most people are not a narcissist and most people have empathy. And so your support system will grow only when you have honest conversations with those around you, including coworkers, so they can see why you're, in such a mess, because
right.
Typically we hide these things. And this isn't the time to hide when you're going through this breakup and you're trying to like process through, getting rid of this person.
Yeah, and the last thing you want to be is in a situation where the narcissist is your only input, your only emotional
Right.
input. You want input from people who support you and understand the situation, because the narcissist will tear you down, and you'll always be trapped if their emotional evaluation of you is the only evaluation you pay attention to, or the only evaluation you get.
Right. Exactly. The other thing is, it sounds obvious. It sort of wraps up everything we've been talking about. Be yourself instead of what others want you to be. Your most familiar response around the narcissist has been to change yourself to meet his expectations, changing your feelings, your choices, your opinions, even how you dress or the food that you eat. You may also find that some friends and family want you to respond to the narcissist and your relationship differently than you believe will work for you. Remember, you are the one going through the experience, and only you can ultimately decide what is best for you to do. A good way to be yourself is to follow your own inclinations and preferences and make the choices that feel best for your well-being.
Right.
And essentially, that's creating boundaries in a healthy way that makes sense to you, that other people might not. They may say, they may have more drastic ideas, and you're like, no, this has to be gradual because the ramifications can be terrible, right?
Well, if they don't have narcissist experience, it's going to be hard for them to give useful help, because until you've encountered that mindset, you don't know how to deal with it. You don't know the reality of the situation.
Right. Exactly. So the last part I'm going to talk about is when you're in the process of letting go, and typically this means getting out of this relationship. You have to change your strategies. We've talked a little bit about this, but specifically it's stop showing your reactions to the narcissist, because when you give them a reaction, like you would say, that's fuel for the fire, right? That's their oxygen. Like they want a reaction from you, because then it gives them some other mean thing to say back to you.
Right.
So don't even show, like sometimes I tell people, I know it sounds counterproductive, but sometimes just saying, I'm not having this conversation, turn around, leave, even if you have to lock yourself in a bathroom.
Yeah, one of the more definitive red flags, if you're wondering whether you're in a relationship with a narcissist, is that when you bring up a problem, it's turned back on you every time. The conversation turns on you. We're no longer talking about what it is as a problem for you. They're talking the why are you being so dramatic, or why are you causing trouble? It's your fault. Everything becomes your fault.
Exactly. It's crazy.
Yep.
So that segues into the next one. Restrict your contact with the narcissist. This works especially well if it's a mother-in-law or a coworker. Set real boundaries and limits, which is great because you and I talk about boundaries all the time.
Yep.
Decide what you will and won't put up with and stick to it. That's basically what a boundary is.
Yep.
When these boundaries are put into legal agreements, honor them exactly, even if sometimes you would also like exceptions. So that even means, like with a divorce agreement, if somebody says, well, but this weekend's my birthday, can I please have them? If you just divorced a narcissist, you cannot bend the rules. You cannot be nice to them. You have to just stick to the rules. It's the only thing that will protect you.
Yeah, you're opening up the door for them to give you a lot of grief.
You're opening up the door, and you know what's going to happen in 6 months when you need to go to a wedding somewhere and you want to take the kids with you because it's your sister. They won't let you because it's their weekend.
Yep.
And then you're going to be kicking yourself that you gave them extra weekends up until the point you needed one. Yeah. Trust me. I've seen that. Step away from conflict. Again, because you're not going to win.
Always good advice.
Yeah, right. And it's their fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other one is protect yourself. So you want to protect yourself from their negativity, which means not hanging around with them as much. And when you say no, walk and leave the room. The next one is change your life. Tune into yourself. Think about what goals or dreams that you left behind and focus more on what you can do for the future. Reflect on how, this is something you and I talk about. Reflect on how you were vulnerable to the narcissist.
Yes.
So you need to have a real conversation, hopefully with someone like me. Right?
What kept me in it? What did I get out of this? What was I, what was I seeking, and why did I need it? Examining your role in the relationship, because again, you were picked for a vulnerability or for who you are. You weren't a random person that this person took in. You were picked, so you have to understand why you were picked.
Right. And that's exactly what the author says here is you were chosen by the narcissist, and you chose the narcissist for reasons that were probably indiscernible to you at the time. So you have to own those. Why did I want that person? Right. Yep. Reassess your friends. When you end a relationship with a narcissist, you may become aware that you have narcissistic relationships that you hadn't noticed before. Narcissists can be entertaining and charming, but they make better acquaintances than real friends. Right. And you may have some people that are real friends that are also narcissists, and you need to really reevaluate that and put some boundaries around those people as well. We're not just talking about the person that you're dating or married to.
Yep. Or coworkers or bosses,
yep.
People in your life in many ways. Yeah.
Right. Don't get stuck in the past. Looking back to figure out and understand the narcissist disorder and disabilities can help you anticipate his or her actions and deal with them more effectively. However, don't get stuck just analyzing the narcissist. Use what you learn to take better care of yourself and move forward. The next one is future fears. What fears do you have about your future? Have you lost hope that what you want is possible?
Yeah.
Are you letting the narcissist's definition of who you are dominate and overwhelm you? And so these are the things that I do. I work with my clients on this to make sure that they feel free, that the person's not around. They may have an emotional stronghold, but they can't get to your heart. It's just all in your head. And when you're not around,
part of the problem here is this self-doubt, because you lost the narcissist, and what you do is you look around and everybody thinks the narcissist is great. He's, right. He or she is a showman. They've got, everybody loves the narcissist, right? So right. Stuff that they don't, and you're wondering, and then I'm never going to find anyone as good as that. You start doubting that the narcissist did what they did or had the problems that they had, because all you hear is, all you see is that everybody loves them, because that's the nature of a narcissist.
Right. Yep, exactly. And the last part is reach out to new opportunities. Letting go of the past helps you reach out to new opportunities that are now opening up. The Chinese character for crisis is a combination of two words, danger and opportunity. Right now, you are probably feeling immersed in the element of danger. After all, a big part of your life, your dreams, as well as maybe your finances, children, and property are all in chaos and turmoil.
Yeah.
But every crisis eventually opens up into new prospects, new viewpoints, new people, new possibilities, and new options. So you want to move forward with that and keep focused on things will be better, things are going to be more positive, and that will lead to your healing, empowering, and transforming of this situation into a life where you can thrive and flourish. And we've got to go, but real quickly, for anybody that's watching to the end of this podcast, next Thursday, November 18th, I am running with a fellow life coach. I am running a seminar by Zoom, so it's all online. Mm-hmm. It's for women. It's called Suddenly Single, and it's for women who have transitioned out of a relationship over the last year, and they're still struggling, and they're not sure what to do with their future, and they're not sure what to do with the baggage that's still kind of tethered to their waist. And so we talk about how to be dealing with the baggage, and then how to bring joy, purposely bring joy into your life moving forward, whether you're choosing to date again or not. And so that will be from 7 to 8 o'clock p.m. EST here out of the Boston area.
Yep.
Next Thursday, November 18th. So if you have listened to the very end, please reach out to people you know that are single women.
And we're going to talk to her next week on the show, right?
Yeah, we're going to have her on the show next week, Laura Burke. Yep, she's a women's transformational coach. And so we're going to power up together for a fun-filled hour. And then we're going to have specials at the end. So who doesn't want that?
Ooh, nice. Yeah, so don't miss next week's show.
That's right. That's right. So we're going to have a good show next week. But I have to run. I've got some clients right at 12. But it was great seeing you, Lou.
Yes, the same. I had fun, and we'll talk to you next Tuesday. That's right. We'll see everybody later. Have a great week and be well and healthy.